Prabhuji, let me know when I can start.
Yes, Prabhu, I will let you know. Just a minute, just give me a little bit time. Okay. So, Prabhu, when you are doing that,
Sorry?
do it slowly, because otherwise, your voice will not come through the mridanga.
Sure. The Mridanga, right?
Yeah, mridanga.
Okay. Sure, Prabhu.
Okay.
I'll do it like.
So, Prabhu, you can start. I will go ahead and share the, the songs, but you can start.
Okay. I'll start with Jairana. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Sharinam Sankirtan ki jai. So can we do the Shad Goswami Ashtakam? Welcome everyone for the Wednesday evening Bhagavad Gita class discussion. So thank you everyone who are joining online on Zoom as well as on YouTube or any other means. We'll sing this song which glorifies us six Goswamis. It is said that in the Chaitanya Charitamrita Antalila, Srila Prabhupada writes that if we want to get over any difficulties in life, if we want to get over any obstacles in life, then we can take shelter of Shad Goswamis, the six Goswamis, who are very merciful, who actually gave the essence of the whole bhakti movement which Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had wanted to spread all over the world. So we're very fortunate that we have this Shad Goswami Ashtakam by Sringivas Acharya. Let's try to sing it and try to pray for their mercy. Krishna Kirtana Gana Nartana Para Premamrita Nidhi Dhira Dhira Jana Priya Priya Karo Nirmatsara Pujito Shri Chaitanya Kripa Bharo Bhuvi Bhuvo Bharavahantarako Mande Rupa Sanatana Raghuyuga Shri Jiva गोपालको वन्दे रूप सनातनो रघुयुगो श्रीजीव गोपालको नाना शास्त्र विचारणैक निपुणो सद्धर्म संस्थापको लोकानां हितकारिणो त्रिभुवने मान्यो शरण्याकरो राधा कृष्ण पदारविन्द भजना नन्देन मत्तालिको वन्दे रूप सनातनो रघुयुगो श्रीजीव गोपालको वन्दे रूप सनातनो रघुयुगो श्रीजीव गोपालको श्री गौरांग गुणानुवर्णन विधो श्रद्धा समृद्धान्वितो पापोतापनिकृन्तनो तनुभृतं गोविन्द गानामृतये आनन्दाम्बुधिवर्धनैकनिपुणो कैवल्यनिस्तारको वन्दे रूप सनातनो रघुयुगो श्रीजीव गोपालको भक्त्वा तूर्णमशेषमण्डलपति श्रेणीं सदा तुच्छव भूत्वा दीनगणेश करुणया कौपीनकण्ठाश्रितौ गोपी भावरसामृताब्धिलहरी कालोलमग्नौ मुहुः वन्दे रूप सनातनो रघुयुगो श्रीजीव गोपालको कूजत् कोकिलहंसकरसगना कीर्णे मयूराकुले नानारत्ननिबद्धमूलवितपा श्रीयुक्त वृन्दावने राधा कृष्ण महर्निशं प्रभजतो जीवार्तगौ मुधा वन्दे रूप सनातनो रघुयुगो श्रीजीव गोपालको संख्यापूर्वक नाम गणनतिभिः कालावसानि कृतो निद्राहार विहार कादिविजितो चात्यन्त दीनौ च यौ राधा कृष्ण गुणस्मृते मधुरिमा नन्देन सम्मोहितो वन्दे रूप सनातनो रघुयुगो श्रीजीव गोपालको राधा कुण्ड तटे कलिन्दतनया तीरे च वंशीवटे प्रेमोन्मादव साधशेष दशया ग्रस्तौ प्रमत्तौ सदा गायन्तौ च कदा हरेर्गुणवरम् भावाभिभूतौ मुधा Vande Rupa Sanatana Raghuyugam Shri Jiva Gopalako He Radhe Vraj Devi Ke Chalalite He Nanda Suno Kuta Shri Govardhana Kalpa Pada Patade Kalendi Vane Kuta Goshantaviti Sarvato Vrajapure Kedhe Mahavivalo Vande Rupa Sanatana Raghuyugam Shri Jiva Gopalako 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 Shri Goswami Ashtakam ki jai. Just okay, we can we'll go to the Bhagavad Gita, 7th chapter, and the verse number is 14, 7:14. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We'll read from the Bhagavad Gita 7:14. I'll read the verse and then we will go directly to the translation and the purport. Does anyone recite or it just goes like that?
Prabhu, you can basically recite, and then I can, if you want, I can recite after that.
Sure, no problem. We can see whatever works. 7:14 Bhagavad Gita. Daivi heshu gunamayi mama maya durattaya mame vaye prapadyante maya me tam taranti te. Daivi heshu gunamayi mama maya durattaya mame vaye prapadyante maya me tam taranti te. Daivi heshu gunamayi mama maya durattaya mame vaye prapadyante maya me tam taranti te. Give it little synonyms, word to word meaning. Daivi, transcendental. He, certainly. Esha, this. Gunamayi, consisting of the three modes of material nature. Mama, my. Maya, energy. Duratyaya, very difficult to overcome. Mam, unto me. Eva, certainly. Ye, those who. Prapadyante, surrender. Mayam etam, this illusory energy. Taranti, overcome. Te, they. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Translation. This divine energy of mind, consisting of the three modes of material nature, is difficult to overcome. But those who have surrendered unto me can easily cross beyond it. Purport. The Supreme Personality of Godhead has innumerable energies, and all these energies are divine. Although the living entities are part of his energies and are therefore divine, due to contact with material energy, their original superior power is covered. Being thus covered by material energy, one cannot possibly overcome its influence. As previously stated, Both the material and spiritual natures, being emanations from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, are eternal. The living entities belong to the eternal superior nature of the Lord, but due to contamination by the inferior nature, matter, their illusion is also eternal. The conditioned soul is therefore called Nitya or eternally conditioned. No one can trace out the history of his becoming conditioned at a certain date in material history. Consequently, his release from the clutches of material nature is very difficult, even though that material nature is an inferior energy, because material energy is ultimately conducted by the supreme will, which the living entity cannot overcome. Inferior material nature is defined herein as divine nature due to its divine connection and movement by the divine will. Being conducted by divine will, material nature, although inferior, acts so wonderfully in the construction and destruction of the cosmic manifestation. The Vedas confirm this as follows. Mayam tu prakritim vidyan, Mayinam tu maheshwaram. Although Maya, illusion, is false or temporary, the background of Maya is a supreme magician, the personality of Godhead, who is Maheshwara, the supreme controller. Shveteshwara Upanishad 4.10. Another meaning of guna is rope. It is to be understood that the conditioned soul is tightly bound by the ropes of illusion. A man bound by the hands and feet cannot free himself. He must be helped by a person who is unbound. Because the bound cannot help the bound, the rescuer must be liberated. Therefore, only Lord Krishna or his bona fide representative, the spiritual master, can release the conditioned soul. Without such superior help, one cannot be freed from the bondage of material nature. Devotional service or Krishna consciousness can help one gain such release. Krishna, being the Lord of the illusory energy, can order this insurmountable energy to release the conditioned soul. He orders its release out of his causeless mercy on the surrendered soul and out of his parental affection for the living entity, who is originally a beloved son of Lord. Therefore, surrender unto the lotus feet of the Lord is the only means to get free from the clutches of the stringent material nature. The words Mam Eva are also significant. Mam means unto Krishna, Vishnu only, and not Brahma or Shiva. Although Brahma and Shiva are greatly elevated and are almost on the level of Vishnu, it is not possible for such incarnations of Rajogun, passion, and Tamogun, ignorance, to release the conditioned soul from the clutches of Maya. In other words, both Brahma and Shiva are also under the influence of Maya. Only Vishnu is the master of Maya. Therefore, he alone can give release to the conditioned soul. The Vedas, Shveteshwara Upanishad 3.8 confirms this in the phrase Tam eva viditva, or freedom is possible only by understanding Krishna. Even Lord Shiva affirms that liberation can be achieved only by the mercy of Vishnu. Lord Shiva says, Mukti pradata sarvesham Vishnur evana samshaya. There is no doubt that Vishnu is the deliverer of liberation for everyone. Prabhupada ki jai. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padkamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tvam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha. हे कृष्णा करुणा नमा हे कृष्णा करुणा सिंधो दीनबंधो जगतपते गोपेश गोपिका कांता राधा कांता नमोस्तुते तप्त कांचन गौरांगी श्री राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्येव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद, श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंदा। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। मां विष्णुपादाय कृष्ण कृष्णाय भूतले Hare Krishna. So, yeah, uh, we chose this. This is a verse from the one of the very famous verses from the Bhagavad Gita, 7.14. Essentially, this is in this verse, Krishna is giving what is the condition of a living entity. You know, it's like, and I mean, Krishna is kind of compassionately saying this verse in a way that how the living entity is actually completely bound by the three modes of material nature. You know, he's like completely under the control of three modes of material nature. But Krishna just doesn't leave us there. He actually gives us some hope, saying, but one who actually surrenders onto him, or one who actually takes shelter of him, they can actually come over it. So we were actually, so just like yesterday, we were celebrating the Independence Day. The United States, they actually got the independence. We received independence here in 1777. Is that right? Yeah, 1777. So basically, yesterday was the day when they wrote the American
1776,
politicians.
Prabhu.
Sorry?
1776.
Oh, 1776. Thank you, Prabhu. So this is the day when the American politicians, they wrote the Declaration of Independence. They wanted to declare their independence from the British. The British, when they had come, I mean, they kind of was ruling over the country and things like that. And then there was a great war, the Revolutionary War happened, and ultimately the many of the colonies, they were victorious and they gained independence. So every year we see on the 4th of July there is a huge celebration all over in every county, literally, about how about for Independence Day. But actually, if we think about it, but what is that? What type of independence are we actually having here? I mean, first of all, you know, I mean, whoever wrote the Declaration of Independence, the people who were there, you know, all those people who signed the Declaration of Independence, they are none of them are here actually to tell us about actual independence, tell us about their independence. They are all being bound by the repeated chain of cycle in the cycle of birth and death. So in a way, they are actually bound, but we think that that's actually our independence. So everyone goes through this chain of four things of old age, disease, birth, and death. You know, birth, old age, disease, and death. In that way, we are actually always bound. In that way, we are always under the modes of the three modes. We are being bound by those. So therefore, that is the real independence is actually to get the independence from these three modes of material nature. And real independence can actually come when we actually take shelter from our hearts. We actually declare our dependence on Krishna. Prabhupada used to say that real independence means to declare our dependence on Krishna. Because living entity, I mean, Krishna is the complete, and we are his insignificant parts. Nitya Nityanam, Chetanas Chetananam, Eko Bahunam, Yo Vidadhati Kama. Meaning that there is Krishna is the one supreme creator and the controller, and all that exists, it completely is coming from him. The entire creation is actually being coming from him. And we, as living entities, we are just this tiny part and the tiny parts of Krishna, just like a screw is actually on its own, it doesn't have any existence. But when that screw is actually connected with the right place in its right constitutional position, then its value is increased even much more. And bhakti means to actually recognize this part, that we are actually dependent on Krishna, that we have our dependence on Krishna, who is that, and that we take shelter of him. And just like this is mentioned in this verse of the Bhagavad Gita. And Bhagavad Gita is actually all about that in a way. It gives the same message. Arjuna, he wanted to act independently. And what was the result? He was actually completely confused. He was like, he couldn't recognize what to do, what not to do. He was frustrated completely. But then when he simply admitted to Krishna that, Krishna, sorry, it's not my cup of tea. I won't be able to do it. At that time, when he took shelter of the Lord, when he surrendered himself to him, at that time, Krishna actually, he gave him complete shelter. That time he gave this knowledge of Bhagavad Gita was spoken, and he followed the will of Krishna. He said, let me please you, Lord. Let me serve you whatever you desire. So that was his desire. So in that way, when we actually when we completely take shelter of Krishna, and we have the dependence on the words of Guru and Krishna, then we will be independent of all the frustrations and the illusions of this material world. We are actually bound up here. Although we may say that, hey, we are independent, we have the freedom of speech, we have all these things. But in a way, we are bound. This material world, Prabhupada says, is like a it's like a prison cell without invisible walls where no one wants to leave. It doesn't require anything. We are shackled by the golden chains, invisible chains, which keep us bounded in this material world. To the degree to the extent we are, when we are not able to, we don't serve, we are not surrendered. To that extent, we actually get bound up by the by the illusions of this world. So once when Srila Prabhupada was when Srila Prabhupada in the initial years, one may think, why is so much to worry about practicing bhakti at this point of time? Why is it so required? Once when Srila Prabhupada was, before he became, in the first time, his friend Narendra Mulik, his friend, he actually took him to meet Bhaktisiddhanta Sai Thakur. Prabhupada was very reluctant to go because he said he met many gurus. Before coming, he met many gurus, and all of them, he had a very great experience with them. But his friend insisted, you should come actually. And then he came, he sat down. As soon as he sat, he offered his obeisances to Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur. He was giving a talk. And then Srila Prabhupada and his friends, when he sat, and as soon as he was about to get up, Srila Prabhupada, Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur told him, the first thing he told, you are a young, educated young man, why don't you preach the message of Krishna all over the world? When he actually mentioned that, Srila Prabhupada was actually a little bit in shock, actually. He's meeting first time Prabhupada, and Prabhupada is actually giving him this instruction. He was like, he was not able to comprehend, actually. Because prior to coming there, Prabhupada also in a Gandhi movement. He was of the mood that, we have to actually get our independence and things like that. And then when Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur told him for the first time, and then Prabhupada kind of asked, but who will you hear your message, as long as we're a dependent country? First, he said we should get independence. Then we can actually, then we will be able to spread this movement of bhakti. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur replied in a very deep voice. He said that the message of Krishna cannot wait for a change. He said it cannot wait for a change in Indian politics. He said it is not dependent on who ruled or who is not ruling, actually. The teachings of Bhagavad Gita are so important that it cannot wait, actually. It has to be distributed right now. And then obviously there was a lot of discussion on, Prabhupada had a lot of discussion with Bhakti Thakur. And afterwards, when he went away, he was very happy that later on when Srila Prabhupada, when he came to the West, he would actually he would very happily tell his disciples that, I was I was happily defeated by my spiritual master. So, this was when this is actually how that getting the independence from the external things. I mean, trying to get independent in a in external circumstantial situational way is one thing, but the Krishna consciousness is independent of these things. I used to remember one devotee used to tell me that Krishna consciousness is independent of time, place, and circumstances. It's not dependent on any of these situations. It made me always think, many times when we are going to different situations, we may think that, this is not the time that I need to do bhakti. I need to, get over this situation and then I can practice. But I was really appreciating that, it's actually not dependent on a situation or circumstances that one is going through and things like that. In this context of discussion that we have, there is Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He actually instructed Srila Sanatan Goswami. Anyway, it's nice because Sanatan Goswami, just Guru Purnima, we had Guru Purnima just a few days ago. I think just 2 days ago. And it is the Guru Purnima is a day when the Vrajvasis, they consider Sanatan Goswami as his guru, as their guru. And just to honor him, they would actually circumambulate the entire Govardhan. Sanatan Goswami was one of the Goswamis, great Goswamis. He actually was the minister. Rupa Goswami and Sanatan Goswami, they were actually, their initial names were Dabir Khas and Sakar Malik. So they were actually ministers under the regime of Nawab Hussain Shah. And Nawab Hussain Shah was, he was a king. He wanted to go over and win a lot of country, win a lot of places, and kind of he was there. And these two ministers, they were the expert. They would manage the entire affairs, and he didn't have to worry about anything. And he was just going on trying to conquer different places. And later on, obviously, they were internally, the only reason they did this was because they didn't want any of the, when he proposed them that to become the ministers, they didn't want to. But the only reason they did it was because Nawab Hussain Shah threatened that if you don't be my ministers, I will torture the Hindus. So in order to save the devotee community, they actually took up the service of serving Nawab Hussain Shah. Anyways, long story forward. But then later on, Sanatan Goswami and Rupa Goswami, they decided that they want to completely take shelter of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they wrote a lot of letters to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu saying that how much they desired that they wanted to surrender completely to them. And later on, somehow, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu only sent one letter once saying that, you don't try to change your situation, just be patient in a way. That was a message he kind of sent. And then later, when the time came that Sanatan Goswami and Rupa Goswami wanted to leave, when they told that they wanted to leave the regime, they wanted to stop serving the king, the Nawab was very unhappy with them and he imprisoned them. And then later on, somehow by the trick of Rupa Goswami had saved some, gold coins, so which was used by Sanatan Goswami to free himself. He gave that as a bribe to the jail keepers. And then Sanatan Goswami was released, and then he crossed the Ganges and he fled, and he took along with him one servant, Ishan. Along with that, he was carrying gold coins. So it's a long story, but essentially, so the the point I'm trying to make is, if we see in the first paragraph, here it says that the living entity actually is Tataska Shakti. So there are two kinds of, here if you see, there is something called as Nitya Baddha and Nitya Mukta. So Nitya Baddha means the living entities who are eternally conditioned. Let me actually, there is a Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he actually explains this very nicely to Sanatan Goswami when he actually visits Varanasi. When Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu visits Varanasi, that time he instructs he instructs Sanatan Goswami there. And let me just open that. It's not actually, I'll just share that 1 second. I'll just, yeah. This is in Chaitanya Charitamrita, 22nd chapter. It's 22nd chapter, 11th verse. Nitya Mukta Nitya Krishna Charana Unmokha Krishna Pari Sadha Nama Bhunje Seva Sukha. He says, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, those who are eternally liberated are always awake to Krishna consciousness and they render transcendental loving service at the feet of Lord Krishna. They are to be considered eternal associates of Krishna and they are eternally enjoying the transcendental bliss of Krishna. It is 22, Chaitanya Madhya Leela 22:11. Actually, I can just read Prabhu, there's no problem in that. Just some Bengali. And it says, Nitya Baddha 22:12, it says, Nitya Baddha Krishna Haite Nitya Bahir Mukha Nitya Samsara Bhunje Narakadi Dukha. Apart from the ever liberated devotees, there are conditioned souls who always turn away from the service of the Lord. They are perpetually conditioned in this material world and are subjected to the material tribulations brought about by different bodily forms in hellish conditions. So, first one we talked about was that how there was Nitya Mukta, who are eternally liberated souls. They don't need, they are completely liberated at any given point of time. And the second one is eternally conditioned, Nitya Baddha. So, yeah. So basically, this one class of living entity is Nitya Mukta, and the other class is Nitya Mukta and Nitya Baddha. So because we're living entity, living entity by nature is he's not conditioned. But actually, we see that we are conditioned, and the point is that we are not able to trace the history of that. Actually, it's many lifetimes that the living entity is bound. It means that many lifetimes we have been like slaved. But slaved by whom? It actually says in the next verse. See, if you see this next one. And why is the living entity being slave? It says here, Sei dosha maya pishachi danda kare tare adhyatmikadi tapatraya tare jaraj mare. Due to being opposed to Krishna consciousness, the conditioned soul is punished by the witch of the external energy Maya. He is thus ready to suffer the threefold miseries. Miseries brought about by the body and mind, the inimical behavior of other living entities, and natural disturbances caused by demigods. The Adhibhautik, Adhyatmik, and Adidaivik. So these three miseries the living entity suffers. And then why is that the living entity is suffering from these things? And apart from this, one may say that this suffering is happening, but it's not all the time, right? But then, we have birth, death, old age, and disease, which are all the time. And these things, and these miseries to Adi Bhautik, Adi Devik, Adhyatmik, these miseries, they come all the time. If you see the living entities, so that's why the living entity he cannot be happy in this material world. Actually, these fourfold changes along with the threefold miseries. This is actually the definition of material world. Dukkhalayam. When we go to Aushadhi, when we take a medicine, what do we go? Where we go? They call it Aushadalaya, basically a place where you get medicine. And if you need education, you go to Vidyalaya, means the place where you get education. And this material world, Krishna, what does it describes? Dukkhalaya, meaning what will you get? The place where you get misery or unhappiness. So this is actually the definition of material world, samsara. So, yeah. And then the next one that it talks about is, he says, what is it that the living entity is actually, because the living entity, kama krodera dasa hana tare lahtim khaya, Brahmite Brahmite Yadi Sadhu Vaidyapaya. So what is the hope for the living entity now? You see, the living entity, he's suffering these threefold miseries and uh, the fourfold problems of birth, death, old age, and disease. At the same time, he has his conditionings. He becomes a servant. He becomes conditioned by the lusty desires and also by the greed. And when the living entity conditioned soul becomes servant of its lusty desires, and when they are not fulfilled, then he becomes a servant of anger, and he continues to be kicked by the external energy Maya. Just like a football, Prabhupada once plays, he says that when the football, sorry, one second, yeah, when the football, right, it actually being kicked here and there. What is the freedom of football? Both the teams are kicking. The football thinks he has a freedom. The freedom is only when till the time he is being kicked out. So if the football thinks I am the freedom movement. So what is that freedom? Prabhupada used to say that. He said, kicked from the party to this party. That's actually the freedom of the football. So this is how the living entity is being in a difficult situation. But then there is a hope actually. I mean, just like the living entity is being kicked like that, we are also being kicked by the two things, lust and anger. This is what it actually Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says. Brahmite, Brahmite. He's wandering here and there through different species, through different lifetimes. He just keeps on wandering. And then it says, Tandra Upadesha Matre Pishachi Palaya, Krishna Bhakti Paye Tabe, Krishna Nikate Yaya. What does it mean? It means that if only by the chance, if a physician or a sadhu, Tandra Upadesha Mantre. What does it mean? Tandra means his. Who's his? Sadhu. It says in the previous line, Brahmite Brahmite Yadi Sadhu Vaidyapaya. If he meets a sadhu by wandering in this entire material world, if he meets a sadhu, and then with his upadesh and with his instructions and hymns, then the external energy, then we can get the freedom. Then we can get real independence. And if we follow his instruction, Palaya, flees, then Krishna Bhakti, devotional service to Krishna will be there actually. Tabe Krishna Nikateyaya. Then we'll get closer to Krishna. And what is the benefit of being closer to Krishna? If we go closer to Krishna, then we get in touch with devotional service, then we can actually achieve real independence. That's it. That's the beauty of getting the association of a sadhu. Now, if you look in the Srimad Bhagavatam, we have we have great examples of how many great souls, they actually became independent. Now, material nature, it works in a very interesting way. It's very, just like if you see, just like if let's say a farmer, he has a cow, okay, and if the cow is very naughty, then what will the master do? He will tie the he will tie the rope around the cow and put it to the pole, and he will not give the length. His independence, the cow's independence, will only be the amount of rope or the circumference of the rope. That will be the independence of the cow. Okay. But if the cow is very obedient to his master, then what does the master do? He'll say, okay, the cow is very obedient, he's not messing up, he's following the whatever his master says. Then the master will increase the circumference of the rope, which will give more freedom to the cow. But still, he is still bound, but he still gets more freedom. And then that way he kind of circulates. He has more place to go around. And the master sees that the cow is much more he's very, he's very, very obedient. And if he gains the trust of the master, then the master will even open the rope. He will let him loose and he let him go in the boundary. He let him go anywhere in the boundary, knowing that he will not going to do any mess. So and then if, let's say, if you imagine if the master is super pleased with with the cow, and what will the master do? He will even open the doors. He'll say, okay, now you go. You go anywhere. I know, because you'll come back. He'll be very obedient, so he'll let him do like that. So same way, Krishna also gives independence to the living entity. Now we're talking about independence in a different way now. When Krishna gives independence, if we are obedient to the will of the Lord and we are following his instructions, taking shelter of Krishna, then Krishna may give full independence to his completely pure devotees, surrendered devotees. He gives full independence. Just like you see the example of Narad Muni. Narad Muni has so much independence that he can go anywhere in the entire universe. And even beyond that, he can go even to the Vaikunta. He doesn't need any visa for any of the places. He can go anywhere because he is completely dependent and surrendered onto the Lord. On the other hand, someone who actually disobeys the will of the Lord and doesn't follow the will of the Lord, their independence is reduced a lot. And what happens when their independence is reduced? They get the body of an animal. In the animals' bodies, they are actually not able to, their only independence is only just say, like just like small sound. They cannot express much. So that's how the independence is given, depending on how one obeys the will of the Lord. Now we'll see what is it that Narad Muni did that he actually became such a great soul that he got complete independence from the Lord. What is it, when someone says that, he has become a billionaire, and we always want to know what is a secret, what is it that I actually have done that they actually became so great souls. So this is the same thing in a similar conversation between Vyasadev and Narada. Narada actually, Vyasadeva asked, how did you become so great? What is it that you do? Please share. They say that if you want to convince someone of something, the best way is to actually give by personal experience. Like let's say if I have some boil on my hand, okay, and I tried some medicine, okay, and I felt that medicine really worked for me. Like let's say I have some cold, and if I take some medicine, it really helped me. And next time if I see someone else with the same disease, then I'll say, no, hey, you should take Chyawanprash, or you should take so and so medicine. It will really affect you. Why? Because it actually impacted me. It helped me, this I took, and it actually made me better. So same way when it's said that among all the different ways of sharing or preaching Krishna consciousness, they say the best way is actually by one's own experience. So that's what Narad Muni actually does. He tells his own personal story of how he became Narada. And so in Narad Muni, he actually goes on. Let me actually share the verse number. One moment. Yeah, sorry. So I'll just go we can go in the, let's see, where is it? Yeah, can we open to first canto, 5th chapter? So Narad Muni is giving his personal account of, and 23rd verse on. Yeah. So from here, Narad Muni is actually telling his story. We'll just read the translation through. He is telling his story of how he became a devotee, of how he became what he became actually. He said that Narad Muni in his past life, he was a son of a maid servant. Okay. His mother was, she was actually just kind of just doing small household chores of different homes. And at the same time, his mother, whenever the great souls, they used to come, she used to serve them. And during that time, Narada being a small boy at that time, he also used to help his mother. During Chaturmasa period, which starts now, sometime around this time, they were the great souls. They don't travel anywhere. They stay at one place and they do bhakti bhajan more. So during that time, his mother was serving, and Narada was also engaging in serving them. He was doing some personal service. And then what did he do? Because these Vedantis, Bhakti Vedantis, they were very impartial, they were very kind. Okay. So because they were very, very kind, they allowed him, they blessed him actually. So this is what happens when we are in the association and vicinity of great souls and we serve them and we receive their blessings. Then then Bhakti can actually, then Bhakti Devi becomes very pleased, and Bhakti Devi is bound to come because of their mercy, actually, because of the great soul's mercy. And then he kind of served them, and they were very pleased with him. And because they were very pleased, they blessed him. And also, and he told, once he actually, by their permission, he took the remnants of their foods. And by so doing, he said, all my sins were at once eradicated. So it is said in Chaitanya Charitamrita also, Bhakta Pada Jal, Bhakta Pada Jal, Bhakta Pada Dhul, and Bhakta Avashesh, Tino Mahabal. It says that if one wants to advance in bhakti, it's said that if just by taking the remnants of the food, remnants of the dust from the lotus feet of great souls, or uh, the water that has washed their feet, and the uh, and the and the food stuff, the ruchishta, when we take those remnants, it kind of, it's like a disease, when how does a disease spread? And you take something which is coming from there, and it actually kind of infects us also. So same way, we want the disease, or not the disease exactly, we want the bhakti which is there in the great heart, in the heart of great souls. When we take that, then we also get infected by their mercy. So he said, although they were impartial by nature, those followers of the Vedanta blessed me with their causeless mercy. As far as he was concerned, and there's a nature, actually, blessings of the Vaishnav, we don't need to ask for them, actually. We can ask, but blessings actually come when the Vaishnav or the devotee is pleased in their heart. When they see that when they are pleased by our service attitude and by our service, naturally the blessings from the hearts pour out, actually. So the service attitude of Narada, the small boy, and his desire to he got so first thing that he did was he was serving them. His service attitude was very good. And second thing was he was serving them in a very humble mood. In the Bhagavad Gita also, Krishna tells that if one wants to gain knowledge, tad vidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadekshantite jnana jnaninas tattva darshana. If we want to gain knowledge, and how do we do it? For Bhagavad Gita 4.34, Krishna says that we actually humbly serve the great souls, humbly serve the masters who have actually seen the tattva, already the truth, and then we hear from them, we inquire from them submissively, and then we render some practical service onto them. So this is what Narada was doing, actually. He served them, and then what did he do after serving? He also went and he was hearing them, actually, and he took their remnants. And then in the association of those great Vedantists, when one does service and when one receives the blessings of the great souls, then naturally the desire within the heart to hear about him, to hear about Krishna, awakens. And that itself, to hear about Bhagavatam, that itself purifies our heart. In the Bhagavatam, in the second chapter of the in the second chapter of the first canto, it says, what is that? Yeah, it talks about Vasudeva Bhagavati, no, Shushushodadhanasya Vasudeva Katharuchi, Shran Mahat Sevaya Vipra, Punya Tartana Nishenaya. It is, yeah. He said that by serving the great souls who are completely freed from all vice, great service is done. By such service, one gains an affinity for hearing the message of Vasudeva. And then what happens when we do the service to the great souls? Then the next thing that happens is Shinvatam Sakatha Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana Hridayantasto Abhadrani Vidhunoti Suhutsakam. What happens is now when we hear Bhagavatam, when we hear the message of Krishna, the message of Krishna has the power to purify our heart. It has a power to purify our heart. But for that to happen, it has to be cultivated by the service attitude. The heart has to be cultivated. It's like a gardening thing. The heart has to be soft. The soil has to be fertile for the hearing and chanting of Shravanadi Jal to actually take its roots and go up. So that happens when we hear, actually, when we do service to the great souls. With that, we develop a desire to hear about Krishna, and we develop a desire for hearing about Krishna. When we hear Bhagavatam, then that way, then the heart becomes cleansed of, and then we develop in desire, intense desire to hear his messages. And when that happens, after that, what happens? Nashta prayeshu bhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati uttama shloki bhaktir bhavati naistiki. Same thing. When here it gives the secrets. By regularly attending the Bhagavatam and by hearing, rendering service of pure devotee, all that is troublesome, the heart is destroyed. It's completely destroyed almost. And then after that, what does it say? Tada rajas tamo bhava kama lobha dayaschaye cheta eter anavidhim stitham satve prasidati. This is the main issue. See, our dependence in this material world, or our we being bound up in this material world, is actually due to the modes of passion and ignorance. Like we read from how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu told to Sanatan Goswami that the Rajogun and Tamogun is actually what is bounding the living entity in this material world. The lust and the desire for the lust, when the lust is not fulfilled, there is anger. This is actually what keeps us bound, the desire to enjoy this material world separate from Krishna. And how will that, where does that come? It is affected because a living entity is affected by the modes of passion and ignorance. And when we hear Bhagavat, when we serve the great devotees, when we try to live our life in Sattva Gun, and that way, the effects of the nature's modes of passion and ignorance, such as lust and anger, is destroyed. It actually disappears from the heart. And then what happens next? Evam prasanno manaso bhagavad bhakti yogata bhagavad tattva vijnana mukta sangasya jayate. When we are thus established, when we continue to hear Bhagavatam, when we continue to serve the devotees, when we continue to chant the holy names, then what happens? Then we rise to the mode of unalloyed goodness. Above goodness is pure goodness. So there are three modes of material nature in which every living entity is bound: sattva, rajas, and tamas. The mode of goodness, passion, and ignorance. So passion and ignorance pulls the living entity down. When we see the effects of lust and anger, they are actually coming from the lower modes of material nature. Okay, that is coming from the sattva, the rajas and tamas. And then that's why they say when there's a lifestyle change and we try to come to sattva gun, and we try to read the Bhagavatam, when we try to serve the devotees, then what happens? We become established in the mode of, by doing it on a regular basis or consistently, then one becomes fixed in unalloyed goodness. This is beyond goodness. Sattva is Shuddha Sattva. And from Sattva to Shuddha Sattva is a state by which one, that happens by being continuously, by practicing prolonged the bhakti yoga. Then actually one becomes in, then one comes in the touch of Sattva Gun or Shuddha Sattva. And in this, when one reaches Sattva, Shuddha Sattva, then one is not affected by the lower modes of nature, or one actually develops real independence. And then what happens? Then at that time, Vidyante hridaya grantis, chidyante sarva samshaya, shiyante chasya karmani, drishta evatman ishvare. Thus a knot in the heart is pierced, and all the misgivings are cut to pieces. The chain of fruitive actions is terminated when one sees the self as a master. Essentially, the idea is that all the misgivings that are actually troubling in the heart, they are actually completely destroyed. So this is what happens when we are going in the life of Narad Muni, coming back there. So Narad Muni, after he received the blessings of the great souls, he heard Bhagavad from them inattentively. So these are some of the qualities of Narada as a boy, which actually one can take lessons from and know what is the secret to actually advance in bhakti. He had a very wonderful service attitude to serve the great souls, and then he humbly heard from them inattentively. And it's also said that he actually was not very playful. although he was a boy, he said his senses were controlled. Okay. He was very focused. He was not like a childish, like a playful guy, very sincere in his efforts to practice. And because of the continuous association with them, he actually developed a strong faith in them. And when that Shraddha is awakened, then actually what happens? One understands that this is actually my real goal. Shraddha Shabde Vishwas Ka Shuddha Nishay. That I'm firmly fixed that I'm going to practice bhakti. That's what happened with Narada. And then after the 4 months of Chaturmasya, the Bhaktivedanta they were leaving. And then they instructed him to actually continue practicing. And he became very clear in his path of bhakti. And later on, by the will of the Lord, the his mother, after the great sages left, his mother left the world actually. She somehow, because of some reason, she left the world. And since he was the only one person, so he kind of first took care of the final rites, and then he went to the north. He was always meditating on Krishna, living in going through different places of the entire lands, going to different lands. And he just completely was in having meditation on Krishna actually. So when his mother actually left because she was bitten by a serpent. Then it was somehow Krishna's arrangement. He just went through different. It said Prabhupada writes in one place that by when one travels to different places and one preaches, or one is actually doing, one becomes very strong in mind. Anyways, that was just a side thing. And then obviously he used to meditate on the Krishna, and he was getting more and more purified with the practice of bhakti. And then later on, once he was meditating, and then he happened to have the darshan of the Lord within his mind actually. But then the Lord didn't show him the darshan again. He just he tried again, but he was not able to do it. He was feeling very unsatisfied. At that time, there was a voice that came. It said that you won't be able to see that in this lifetime, but you will be able to see me in your next lifetime, and you will actually see me all the time. You will have all the thing. And then he just kept on doing his bhakti. He kept on practicing, and in that way, when he left his body at that time, he actually became the great sage Narada, and he was completely absorbed in his practice of bhakti. So this is an example of how obviously Bhagavatam gives a lot of many different examples of people who actually became great souls. And Narada is just one such example whose life we can take, whose example we can take and know how he actually became a great soul. And then after this, so this was one part. And let's see, just a second. Yeah. So we talked about how initially we talked about Sri Sanatan, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu instructing Sanatan Goswami and explaining about what is how the living entity is bound and what it takes actually for living entity to come out of the material world. And now we saw the one example. Now we can see another example of how someone who actually had the independence, but he misused it, and then how they degraded. There were two great there were two what do you call it? There were two great heavenly denizens named Manigriv and Nalukuver. So they were the two sons of Kuvera. Okay. And yeah. So they were the two sons of Kuvera, and they were living in just a second. So they practice. I mean, they were the denizens of heaven. They were the sons of Kuvera, and they happened to. Uh, I mean, obviously, Kuvera was a very great devotee of Lord Shiva, and by the grace of Lord Shiva, their Kuvera's opulence had no limit. He was very wealthy, actually. Generally, just as when a rich man has so much money, generally the sons become spoiled, and they become addicted to, they got addicted to wine and women. And the sons of Manigriva and Alukuve, the sons of Kuvera also were like that. So once they actually, what did they do? They actually entered the province of Kailash on the banks of Mandakini Ganga, and there they drank a lot of wine, and they were in the association of beautiful women who were accompanied with who were there, and they were enjoying with them. At that time, suddenly Narad Muni came, and Narad Muni, he's a great soul who is always on the mission. He's called as a jet age guru, or a traveling guru, Parivraj Kacharya, who always is going on trying to deliver all the people in whatever possible way, and in a way that is actually more, in a way that they will be able to take it up to bhakti. So that's always the attempt of the great souls to share Krishna consciousness in a way that they can accept it. And then the Narad Muni, he, in order to preach to them, he didn't go and give any class to them. He actually told them that, he kind of cursed them actually. He cursed them. He didn't like that. When Narad Muni came, suddenly the ladies, they actually covered themselves. They felt very shy and they kind of went away. But these two demigods, they were so degraded and intoxicated that they didn't pay any attention to Narada. So Narada, he cursed them that they would be trees for 100 years. And even within that curse, there was actually a blessing. It said that within every difficulty or within every curse, because it's all happening under the will of the Lord, impregnated within every seed of difficulty or curse, difficulty is actually a great benediction that lies. So when the great souls, when the great souls, even their curse is also filled with blessing. So when they were blessed, they were blessed by Narada, when they were cursed by Narada, that they will be trees for 100 years, and they would be trees in the courtyard of Nanda Maharaj. In the month of Kartik, we actually sing this Damodar Ashtakam, and the whole very beautiful pastime of Damodar Lila happens actually. And these days, Manigriva and Nalukuver, they actually were cursed to become trees in the courtyard of Nanda Maharaj. Now one may see that although there was so much freedom that was there for Manigriva and Nalukuver, they actually desired, because they misused their independence, they became like trees. They lost their independence. They couldn't move from one place for 100 years. So that's what happened. Obviously later on they were delivered by they had darshan of Sri Krishna, and when the whole Damodara Leela happened, when the wooden mortar was taken between those two trees and removed, and Krishna delivered them. And the reason why they got delivered by Krishna is because Narada desired it. So when we are in the good books of great souls, and when they bless us, then there is some hope for us to grow in our bhakti. So yes, so when they got, when they got delivered, and later on, they were praising Narada, that because of blessings of Narad Muni, that they actually were able to uh, get the darshan of Sri Krishna. And yeah, what else? Yeah, and once Prabhupada was, this is one nice pastime of Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada, once uh, he was in Jagannath in San Francisco. There was a Rath Yatra festival happening, and after the Rath Yatra, all the devotees, they went and they met Srila Prabhupada, explaining what happened and everything, and Prabhupada was very happy. And then Prabhupada was sharing his experience about, one devotee was asking question that, why is it that, you know, when Prabhupada said this, Prabhupada was saying that, Prabhupada was giving the example that, when he came from India in a flight, he said he was coming in the ocean of, when he came from India, he was coming in the ocean. And when he came to New York, and from New York to San Francisco, he came by flight. He said, I was flying above an ocean of clouds. He said, I was flying above the ocean and I could see, and the clouds were extending as far as I could see actually. But above the clouds was the sun. But when we came down on the runway, when we came down to San Francisco, he said everything in San Francisco was again clouded. Everybody said this, but the sun was still shining. He said that Prabhupada made a nice point. He said those clouds cannot cover the whole world, not even the entire United States, which is but a speck of the universe, Prabhupada said. And he said from this airplane, we see these skyscrapers is a very, very tiny actually. He said similarly from God's position, this whole material universe is actually very insignificant. It is not such a great thing. As a living entity, we are very insignificant. And the living entity has a tendency to come down, Prabhupada said. He said, but the sun does not have a come down tendency, Prabhupada said. And then it is always above the clouds of Maya. And then one disciple asked Prabhupada, he said, why is it that one soul rises and another soul doesn't rise? Then Prabhupada asked, why is one soul in the beer hall and another in the Krishna hall, in the Krishna temple? And Prabhupada says, and obviously there was no response. And Prabhupada continued saying, because one wants to be here and another doesn't want, he says. And then he said, that is actually independence. Our independence is that how we use our choice. And obviously Prabhupada continues. He said, that is our independence. And he said, misuse it and you're down. Use it and you're up. So this pastime that we actually saw of Narad Muni and Manikriva Nalukuver, they actually had the entire, they had all the facility, but they misused their independence. They went down. And then like the small Narada boy, although he was a very son of a Shudra woman, because he used his independence in the right way, he went up. He became great Saint Narada. So our life is mainly in terms of what kind of choices we make, and our choices depend on our association. See, we talk about dependence. We talk that, how we have to be dependent on Krishna. At the same time, if we want to develop real independence, we have to be dependent on Krishna. But there is more than just dependence and independence. There is something called as interdependence. There has to be interdependence with other devotees. And when there is interdependence, then that interdependence leads one to develop complete dependence on Krishna. Because unless and until we have dependence or we seek shelter of others' association, we seek shelter of the devotees, we seek shelter of, because one cannot approach Krishna directly. One has to go through devotees. And we are fortunate that Srila Prabhupada, he created the whole ISKCON society where we can associate with devotees, have regular satsang, and have that loving reciprocation and loving exchanges with devotees, which actually gives us hope. The whole power of association, the whole satsang is actually meant to give us hope. And there is that what we are doing is in the right way actually. And then once Srila Prabhupada, once Giriraj Swami mentions that, when after they acquired the Juhu land, Srila Prabhupada instructed some Mr. Sethi to construct a compound wall around the temple, around the property. And then Srila Prabhupada was going on a morning walk and he was going along with his friend, Dr. Patel. He's a very famous person. He was always there with Prabhupada. And then he pointed to Prabhupada and he said, he pointed to the new compound wall. It was a 5-foot wall. And he told Prabhupada, Prabhupada, seeing this wall, people are saying that you have made a prison inside. And then Srila Prabhupada immediately responded, he said, no. He said, the prison is outside, inside is freedom. So, yes, so we are fortunate that we have the process of Krishna consciousness that we can actually take shelter of. We have the association of devotees, Srila Prabhupada, who has actually given us the entire Krishna consciousness movement to take it, apply it in our life in the form of, he gave the devotees, he gave the Bhagavatam, he gave services, and he also gave us so much to do. Actually, he gave us a mission to serve. He gave us a mission to serve Lord Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, to spread the Krishna consciousness movement. So we can take this Krishna consciousness seriously, serve Srila Prabhupada's instructions. Then we can also gain the real independence. And we can get really independent of, and we can go back home, back to God, and not be bound in the cycle of birth and death and be slaves in this material world. Sure. Thank you very much. I'll stop here. It's 8:22. If anyone has any questions or comments or reflections or corrections, please feel free to let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhu, for your wonderful lecture. Really nice to see you. I haven't seen you for a long time.
Yes. And, so happy to see you, Roman Prabhu.
Yeah, so I was reading today Srimad Bhagavatam. It's 429, 36, 37, when Narada Muni called our material world is Anartha Parampara, which is, you clearly stated that we have to select the right parampara to get outbound from the material world. So, as well as you said, the importance of the ABCD of devotional service, which is association, books, chanting, and the diet. So it was really wonderful. Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you. You gave the whole, whatever I spoke in 1 hour, 20 minutes, to just summarize in 20 seconds. Thank you, Roman Prabhu.
So, Prabhu, let me quickly check online if there are any comments or questions. Let me quickly check. Okay. I don't see any. I mean, one Prabhu is saying, hi, I am from Thailand. Kam Agjira. Prabhu. Someone has joined from Thailand, Prabhu, to hear your lecture.
Hare Krishna.
So very nice lecture, Prabhu, very nice lecture. And it is very apt, right? Because this concept of national independence, right, is from the forces. Basically, we are trying to do whatever we want. Basically, that is the kind of independence. Actually, all this, the independence of this material world, right? But when we do that, we actually, like the spider's web, right? We get more and more entangled. We don't realize. So that is not actually the right independence. What the independence of this material world.
Yes. Thank you, Prabhu. Yes, that's so true. Actually,
yeah.
The modern way of seeking independence is, I do what I like to do. Do what we want to do. That's the modern way.
Yeah.
And the Vedic way is, we do what we are meant to do. That is actually independence in the Vedic sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Prabhu. Okay, someone has, I think, put something in the chat.
Yes. Thank you, Yugal Hira Prabhu, for joining.
So, Prabhu, there are no more comments.
I will end with one simple verse.
Oh, simple verse. Okay.
Yes. Which is actually it says, what is the effect? What happens when we actually hear from a great soul? When we hear from a great soul, how is the impact actually? How does it impact our existence? Or why is hearing so much emphasized, or how does it have an impact? So this is from the 4th canto, 20th chapter, 25th verse. Uttama shloka. You want to share, Prabhu?
Yeah. This one?
Yes. So uttama shloka mahan mukhachuto bhavat padam bhoja shudhak kananilai smritir punar vishrimita tattva vartmananam kuyoginano vitarati alam varai. Okay. It says, my dear Lord, you are glorified with the selected verses. This is Prithu Maharaj actually saying. My dear Lord, you are glorified with the selected verses uttered by great personalities. Such glorification of your lotus feet is just like saffron particles. When the transcendental vibrations from the mouths of great devotees carries the aroma of the saffron dust of your lotus feet, the forgetful living entity gradually remembers his eternal relationship with you. Devotees thus gradually come to the right conclusion about the value of life. My dear Lord, I therefore do not need any other benediction but the opportunity to hear from the mouth of your pure devotees. So this is such a apt purport, basically saying that just by hearing what actually happens when we hear from the great souls, it actually all the abhadras or all the things that are actually causing disturbance to our heart, they completely get vanquished. So yes, Prabhu. To leave on a high note.
Yeah, we come to the right conclusion, he's saying.
Yes.
Very nice. Thank you, Prabhu. It's amazing you can, pick up the verses from the Bhagavatam. You remember the verses and you have got very good intelligence. I would say spiritual intelligence. You can pick up the verses at the right time.
Well, we are fortunate to have Srila Prabhupada who gave us these things, gave us all the Bhagavatam. Prabhupada had many projects, Prabhupada actually did he had many projects. He had farm community, he had, opening temples, taking care of devotees, so many things Prabhupada was doing. But the one thing that was constant in all his places, wherever he went, and it did something till the last moment of his life, was actually translating the Srimad Bhagavatam and giving it for us. So that's actually the most greatest project which Prabhupada did. And certainly there is a value in actually giving attention to the greatest project which Prabhupada did in the most important time of the day, the early morning hours, when everyone was asleep, because he wanted to give this for the entire world for the next 10,000 years, as he mentioned many times. This is the law book for the next 10,000 years. So, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Yeah.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you for your kind help in the.
Govinda Prabhu ki jai.
Thank you for kindly helping in all the moving in different shlokas and everything, Prabhu. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time and patience. Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you, Roman Prabhu.
Thank
So
you,
nice
Prabhu.
to see you after a long time. We'll connect sometime soon.
Absolutely, Prabhu. Haribol.
Hari Bol. Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.